Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. If someone in your life has BPD, you know how difficult it can be, and you need to learn how to heal from those toxic relationships. And that's where this show comes in. Expert education, expert knowledge, expert insight, and delivered with compassion and empathy. To purchase and book sessions with AJ Mahari, visit ajmahari.ca. This is the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. And now your host, AJ Mahari.
Have you ever heard, perhaps you've even experienced this, maybe without knowing it, that it kind of has a name in colloquial speech, which doesn't mean that it's clinical terminology? Understanding the empty eyes phenomenon in borderline personality disorder. What the heck is that about? Well, as people probably know or are finding out, borderline personality disorder is a very severe mental illness, largely trauma-based for more people than not, but not all who are diagnosed or could be diagnosed with it. And people with BPD have that instability in moods, interpersonal relationships, self-image, and behavior. This instability is often so disruptive to all areas of the person with BPD's life, but for some, it's more disruptive in interpersonal relationships. Some are higher functioning. They might function better at work or in career. When they come home, it's all on, empty eyes and all, but mood instability, impulsivity, inconsistent, incongruent behavior, statements made, the way they really feel, how they're going to act. Things change on a dime, and often people are just shocked, but really hurt and really affected by that. People with BPD, as I'm always saying out here, they don't have, unless really well treated, they don't have a sense of self. They don't have a known self. And they don't know the difference between self and other. So there's been this curiosity. I've had many clients raise this question also, with the way that a person with BPD can look sometimes. Like when you're relating to them, you're in a relationship with them, you're dating them, or maybe it's a family member. But every once in a while, they just look like their eyes really change. I've heard some people say their eyes change color. I really don't think that's what's happening. I've heard a lot of other people, clients reporting that, their partner, their ex now, or the on-off limbo stuff, that this person with BPD in some of my clients' lives, whatever the person that was, each client, you know what I mean? Clients have often reported seeing really cold eyes, really empty eyes changing color, glazed over eyes. And then so many people out there in their spectacular, erroneous, egregiously ridiculous fashion that might be somewhat put out there from the APA, that's pseudoscience from those studies that aren't replicated and don't prove anything. They're trying to say that people with BPD with like vacant eyes or changing eyes, or that this is a self-state in BPD. Not really. It has all to do with their emotional dysregulation, how they get triggered to that. How their eyes can change really markedly, really quickly, and back and forth, and be looking vacant or empty eyes or cold hard eyes or just glazed over eyes. Their eyes are just not even looking at you, not even present all of a sudden. Where did they go? Because they are somewhere else. It has a lot to do with dissociation. But again, it's not really the self-state nonsense. It hasn't been proven. And it really, I think, takes people in a wrong kind of not helpful direction. And if you're somebody who's with somebody with BPD, or you're recycling the relationship, or it's on off, you're in limbo, you've been ghosted, and you just can't break this trauma bond because really maybe you haven't got into any healing recovery journey. I'm not here to work with people that want to work on this. and break the trauma bond and really go no contact, work towards no contact. It's difficult for a lot of people. So, but this empty eyes phenomenon and people with BPD can be very many things, okay? And then there's things like self-states. It doesn't mean that. And then there's even people online saying, oh, it's because they're like, being taken over by the evil spirits. And, well, in my humble opinion, that's utterly ridiculous. But there's a lot of people out there that believe this kind of stuff. I don't know, maybe because they don't know how to critically think. I really wouldn't know. So the empty eyes phenomenon, BPD, well, this term, right, it's frequently used as an observable, to observe a characteristic in individuals with BPD. But it's not a medical or psychiatric or psychological term. Like I said, it's a colloquial phrase that's used to depict the void or absence of emotional depth and, often perceived. In other words, the lack of emotional depth, the lack of presence, the lack of looking like how they might, quote, regularly look, unquote, people with BPD. So these empty eyes, this perception that people have of the changing eyes of the person with BPD, with that, it's important to note that this phenomena can be fairly subjective, and that even if you see this, experience this, you might not, you might have attributed a lot of things to it, but you might not really totally understand what's really behind when there can be some changes in the eyes people with BPD. That I don't think, like I said, it doesn't mean they're evil or being possessed by evil spirits. All this stuff that people say out there is just nonsensical. But there is a reason for it, and it's what's happening internally for each person with BPD. And so where are they really in any given moment when they're experiencing so much internally that you might not be aware of in the moment? Because if they have quiet BPD, they're likely withdrawing and not saying much. And this can happen, you could be sitting there talking to the person with BPD, and then they get triggered by something, and that's not your fault, but they have their own triggers they need to learn and deal with, and it would be nice if many of them would go to therapy who are not going to therapy at all. So then when they feel something triggers a different feeling, like more intense, overwhelming, more chaotic, tumultuous feelings inside of them. They don't often, without treatment, they don't have a clue why they're feeling all they're feeling. That's why it gets projected out as your fault. You're doing it to them because they don't know why they're feeling all this stuff. And its triggers go to intense emotional dysregulation, can definitely affect the way their eyes look at times, and it affects whether they're connected to the here and now in the moment. They're often not connected to you anyway. Sometimes they might be really present. You can have a close time. But then, they're going to get engulfment fears or anxiety, and then they're going to push away, and then the distance, and then, they pushed you away, but then they feel like you abandoned them. And then the next thing they really want to pull you back in. And this can take place in a relationship. This can take place in terms of the silent treatment. This can take place with classic acting out, raging borderline with the rage episodes is the push away. And then the sort of like, not saying anything and not taking any personal responsibility, but just reapproaching you as if nothing happened after a rage. And the point is, so what's driving all this is internal to them, and they don't really consciously understand what it is, nor do they realize or have really any awareness untreated of how this is affecting you, how this is hurting you, how this affects your trust. And if they're doing this in ghosting cycles and patterns of coming ghost and then coming back versus is it a ghost and a discard, it really starts to be very wearing on people. So to the point where you really need to, get into your own healing recovery process and be able to get out of these really unhealthy and toxic trauma bonded relationships, which, by the way, have dynamics that then becomes about both people in the relationship but I'm not comparing people with codependency to people with BPD. So these empty eyes, people with BPD, are more perceived by the observer, right? It's like your perception, and you might be perceiving accurately there's a real change in their eyes. You might not perceive the reason for that or what does that mean, but yeah, you can see maybe they've gone far away. Maybe their eyes are really different. Maybe it's scary because they could be the empty eyes, the glazed over eyes, the really cold, hard-looking eyes. And when a person with BPD is described as having, quote, empty eyes, unquote, it could indicate their emotional turmoil inside, as I've said. A key component of BPD might be present itself in this way. Individuals with BPD often experience intense and rapidly shifting emotions, making their expressions seem at many points and times, making their expression seem really vacant or void, as they may disconnect their emotions. They're disconnected from their emotions, trying to protect themselves. They're kind of shutting down internally. And this is a process known as dissociation. So dissociation and emotional dysregulation in BPD. What is the role of dissociation? Well, dissociation is a common psychological, really maladaptive but coping mechanism that people with BPD, I wouldn't say employ like consciously, but they just get kind of usurped by this process of dissociating, so disconnecting from the here and now because they are experiencing so much inside that is really from their past. But in that dissociative way, they're going to experience what they're experiencing right now as being about right now. And then they'll think it's your fault because they don't know where it's coming from internally. But it is so often about them re-experiencing things from childhood. And that dissociation, as somebody who experienced that a long time ago, because I've healed and recovered, and I didn't really have full-blown BPD, but I got labeled with it and 4 strong traits and a lot of therapy because I had a narcissistic, dysfunctional family of origin, with alcoholic parents that were narcissists and with comorbidities. And so anyway, I had enough trauma in my childhood, let me just put it that way. And I did have a lot of therapy, and I went through all this and healed and recovered and averaging mentally healthy now. So I know this, though, from the inside out. How you can just get like a trigger. We didn't use these words way back, when I was like in my late teens and 20s. But the thing is, when I was in therapy and working through this largely, from the age of 15, by the age of 30, I was told that I was healed and recovered. And like I said, it probably wasn't really full-blown BPD, but it was the core of a few of the major symptoms or traits of BPD, but I wasn't assessed properly. So that's looking back. But the point is, I really have been on the inside of this experience of dissociation. And there were times back in my, quote, BPD days, unquote, which are like over 40, 45 years ago now. I don't know. Pretty well, almost 40 years ago. I remember going through some of those episodes of dissociation. And I remember the internal reality of how that would feel and how they would be sitting in a room. It happened once in therapy, for example. I'm sitting in the room and, it went on for a day in therapy, which means 5 hours of that day. I just was not there. Like, I was there physically. I knew where I was. I knew what day it was, and I knew the date too. But I just kind of didn't want to be there. And maybe I was dealing with some difficult, some really difficult things in my recovery at that point. But I remember this one Wednesday, I was just like beyond it. And I don't mean like, better and beyond it, but just like so sick and tired of it. So sick and tired of the agony, sick and tired of the pain, sick and tired of the work up there. But this one day I just kind of, something probably did trigger me. And I don't recall what that was, but maybe I came to therapy that way from something triggered me before I got there. But there was this one Wednesday in the middle of, I was in the group therapy. And so this is like several years into my therapeutic process. And I was really making a lot of progress. But on this one day, I know what I was internally feeling. I was madder than hell. I was very angry, but I don't think it was at any individual. It was just the angst and the anger of like what I was internally feeling. And I'm not sure what that was anymore because I don't remember what it was associated with now. But at that time, that whole day, I don't think I looked anybody in the eye. I didn't really have a care about what was going on. I was just there because you can't just skip days for no reason, So I didn't want to be there that day, though. And this was probably the worst it was for me in terms of it lasted the whole 5 hours of the therapy group program. I was an outpatient, by the way. So, I don't know, in the middle of that day, like around lunchtime when we would, have a break and have lunch, and there was a kitchen there. And I remember somebody did, because nobody was talking to me. And I remember thinking, like, I didn't want anybody to talk to me. Just leave me alone. Just bug off. I don't care. Like, I was in a mood, a place, a state. And somewhat dissociated for sure. So the point here is, somebody asked me, like, hello, are you here? Like, what's going on with you? And I can remember just, like, I heard them. And internally, my response was just kind of like, F you. Like, bug off. Like, I don't care. Just leave me alone. But I didn't say anything. I think I just walked away. And I wasn't, really quite borderline. Like, I wasn't the type of person who would just not say anything away. But that happened then. So the whole day goes on like this. And I know what's going internally. It's just awful for me. But I didn't know that it was, I was so into my own feelings and they were intense and I was dissociated. And what did that really mean? Well, I was somewhere inside my emotional dysregulated pain from the past, but I was still connected to the here and now. Now, that's maybe not the case for everybody when they're experiencing dissociation, depersonalization, derealization in BPD. Because like when I was in therapy many moons ago, decades ago, it used to just be thought that the depersonalization, derealization was kind of part of BPD. And now, I don't know when, but in the DSM, they made derealization, depersonalization, like it's on the axis 1 dissociative disorders. Or one could argue BPD largely could belong too, because there's so much dissociation going on with the mood instability, the lack of self, not understanding difference of self and others, let alone people with BPD's MDI. So I'll just move through this more quickly here. I was aware of all the people around me. I was aware of the day and where I was, but I was also very much inside emotionally, in a time, in a different place, re-experiencing family of origin stuff. That I do remember, but I don't remember specifically what. I just didn't want to be there that day. So anyway, I stayed and I went to all the groups and I ignored everybody and I didn't talk to anybody. Mostly people were, after an hour or two of seeing me, because I didn't know what I looked like, the people just kind of pretty much avoided me. And I can remember at one point feeling like, what's up their butts anyways? What's wrong with them? Like, what? Like, now they're just... So I had these two things going on. The part of me in the here and now, or then, was like, why are all these people just like, whatever? And then I was like, they're not really, I don't know, they're not talking. Okay, what? Screw them, forget it. I don't even care. I don't want to talk to them anyway. So it was kind of like in two places at once with some awareness of that. So long story short then, this goes on for 5 hours one day on a Wednesday. Back in I don't know what year. I'm 65 now, and I was about 28 then, so, you can do the math. But the thing is, so I go home on that day. I think my prime therapist tried to call me in to talk to me, and I just walked away. I was just not even very present, not caring, not wanting anything to do with anything that day, which was really something I didn't experience a lot of in therapy or in general. So I go home and I think I eventually just shift out of it, or I think about it, I journal about it, I worked it through probably, and in preparation for having to go back for another 5 hours the next day, right, of therapy. So I show up the next day, still kind of feeling some of the stuff from the day before, and I'd been journaling about whatever it was specifically, but I didn't have. So they didn't describe my eyes as empty that day. So on the next day, I heard all about it. We had this large group, and they're process groups, and people can ask, other clients in the group, like I was a client, could ask me any questions they wanted or whatever. And the first thing that somebody started with, the therapist says in the beginning of the group, like, who wants to start off today? Which they would always say that. And somebody goes, I do. And they said, yeah, I want to know what was up with AJ yesterday. What was going on? And then looked at me, right, and said, what was going on for you? Because you had these glazed over eyes. I've never seen you like that before. And you just look so angry. And they were describing how I really looked. I had some anger inside, but it wasn't like, I wouldn't say it was like so predominant, the emotion that I was feeling that day, that it wouldn't be like maybe palpable anger. But anyway, people were experiencing. So the next day I would hear about how they experienced me. Your eyes were glazed over. Your eyes looked really like cold and hard and like there was a void, like you weren't even there. What were you doing? How come you didn't say anything to anybody all day yesterday? And then a couple other people chimed in and said it was scary. Like, I thought you were so angry. I thought you were going to hit somebody and all these other. So these are other people's perceptions, right? How they experienced that I was in this dissociative place. But kind of like in both places at once, but not like fully anywhere at the same time. So they described that I had glazed over eyes, really cold, hard, dark, like gnat or empty looking eyes, right? Which is what I'm trying to talk about here. And so I just thought I would share that I had an experience internal. I had a few others too, but they would happen like when I was in class in university, or people weren't noticing because, like in class, people are watching, listening to the professor, watching what's going on the board or whatever back then. And so there was no, like in this group though, it's like people are sitting around me, sitting across from me, seeing me being really different than I usually was. So I had the empty eyes, the glazed over eyes, the really cold, hard, I guess really super looking angry eyes. Largely, it was all about being disconnected, detached, lost inside myself, and dissociated. And I was aware of that dissociation. I didn't really have any dissociation within which I lost total touch with reality because I just didn't have the issues that severely. So when people with BPD are feeling dissociated, they have really no ability to cope with overwhelming, intense emotions. During dissociation, people disconnect from their thoughts, feelings, memories, or any sense of identity that they might have, which is really not to say that there's much of that there. And it can manifest as glazed over eyes, like I just described, or the empty eyes, empty look in a person's eyes. So hence the colloquial term of borderline empty eyes, right? The phenomenon of empty eyes in people with BPD, at times, is associated with, as I said, depersonalization or derealization, where individuals feel detached. Oh, yeah, like I was describing, just totally detached, disconnected, just, yeah. Not really there, but I knew I was there. So individuals with BPD can feel really detached from themselves and their surroundings. The world might seem dreamlike or unreal to the person with BPD experiencing dissociation and perhaps having glazed over eyes or empty looking eyes. And the world will seem dreamlike or unreal because the person with BPD is experiencing, like they may be observing themselves in a way from an outsider's perspective. This state can lead to confusion, disorientation, and this state is dissociation, by the way. Can lead to confusion, disorientation, and the appearance of emotional emptiness or emotional aloofness and coldness. And let me just stress again, being disconnected from the here and now, which isn't like I never experienced a psychotic break. It's not always that or a transient psychotic break. I never had that symptom. I never had any of that. So within dissociation, it can just be the internal feelings that are happening and the person isn't fully present and they're not connected and they are detached and they're experiencing something inside that is sort of playing like a movie is how I used to experience it internally. And memories you might be thinking about memories. I mean, I was at times. And then you're just not really wanting to connect to the people around you or the here and now, or maybe like if you experience a partner or an ex-partner you experienced or whatever that went through something like this and had those empty eyes or the glazed over eyes or the hard, cold, aloof eye look. There's usually some feeling around a person that you would pick up to, and you would be like, what's going on? Why are they doing this? And then if you start asking them questions, you probably, I know like that Wednesday from decades ago I was describing, you probably won't even get an answer or an acknowledgement. This is a temporary disconnect from the here and now, and it's not been proven that it's any kind of, quote, self-state, unquote. It's not psychopathy. It's not all the things that a lot of people egregiously and erroneously say out there. And as somebody who lived through many of these episodes, not really to that degree, but, I had some wildest that experience to a degree many times. So empty eyes in BPD has a lot more to do with what is really happening inside the person with BPD that has to do with dissociation, and not the sort of many different layered explanations that many people put out there about, they're evil now, or their eyes look like this, but their eyes can look very childlike as well. And many individuals with BPD describe an enduring sense of emptiness. So the perception of empty eyes in individuals with BPD should not be mistaken for lack of feeling or capability or for with emotion, because I think too there's been a lot said by people out there and maybe misinterpreted by mental health professionals that a person with BPD in this dissociative disconnected place can have these empty eyes, these eye changes, these glazed over eyes. And a lot of people think, I've heard it out there somewhere, people saying that might be, the person with BPD right there, they have no conscience. It's like some, like that secondary psychopathy nonsense, which, by the way, they just threw that out when they decided, hey, rather than say borderlines have secondary psychopathy, just call them psychopaths, because when they have this dissociation in these different emotional states, like dissociated, overwhelmed, that can produce empty eyes, hard, cold eyes, glazed over eyes, they must now be the psychopath. Not at all. I mean, I went through a lot of this myself, and I certainly am not a psychopath. Never was, never will be. And so the appearance of emptiness and empty eyes in people with BPD may be more accurately viewed as a protective shield. By the way, that's what it felt like for me on that given Wednesday I described to you. Just a Wednesday from way ages ago. I didn't know what Wednesday. It was probably in the late summer in that group. So, can be accurately viewed as a protective shield on the person's part with BPD, guarding against an internal world of emotional turmoil, sometimes really a lot of fear, re-experiencing something dissociatively, and it's very, very intense. So understanding the, quote, empty eye, unquote, phenomena in borderline personality disorder contributes to a broader and deeper comprehension of the disorder. Rather than simply observing the external manifestation, it's essential to acknowledge these individuals' internal struggles and that they're not getting demon-possessed because their eyes change. It can be very intimidating because if somebody is more the petulant borderline, which to whatever degree I fit BPD for real, I was petulant a lot, unfortunately. Not like that now. I haven't been that like that for like 35, 40 years. Maybe a bit longer. But the point is that petulance can really, with the rage, with glazed over eyes, or when people with BPD rage, sometimes the quiet borderline in the silent treatment could have glazed over, empty looking, aloof, change in the eyes because they're in emotions that aren't about the here and now. And I just think it's important for people to understand this so that maybe you can consider it versus what some people say out there about it's, they're being demon possessed or, or it's some quote self-state. So when people with BPD seem to have their eyes change, the empty eyes, the glazed over eyes, the kind of aloof or really angry or empty or void looking eyes, it's really a reflection of where the person is inside with extreme, overwhelming, just emotional dysregulation that the person with BPD, unless and until treated and understood this, and then this doesn't happen anymore, the person with BPD does not really understand what's happening for them, and they're struggling. And so how their eyes will change is just often a manifestation of the dissociation, where they are. Is it fear? Is it anger? Are they just somewhere inside internally that they can't even, that they're probably not aware of what they're looking like to somebody who might observe this. But yeah, the empty eyes and the glazed and the, all the different eye changes that can happen, it really is reflective of what's going on internally in the triggered emotional dysregulation and or dissociation and degrees of dissociation in people with BPD. It will affect their eyes. You will see changes. And like the other thing that you could see besides empty eyes or this void or aloof or cold and hard and angry looking eyes, you could see like the lost, innocent kind of like extreme fear, panic, sort of really young eyes of the child that they were, when now they're maybe, triggered to emotional dysregulation, dissociation, and re-experiencing something in the here and now from a time. But I think that people really need to understand the changeability of people's eyes as it reflects what they're really going through emotionally, that isn't about them being evil or any of that kind of stuff. Certainly not within BPD anyways. But a lot of people always want to, or maybe it's your perception, maybe it's what you fear, or maybe it's what shocked you about the change, or the empty eyes, or the glazed over looking eyes, or, all the things I've mentioned. And what are you supposed to do with that, right? Because it's hard to observe that, to see that, to maybe be scared of it, to maybe be shocked by it, to maybe really feel, if you're seeing like young, panic, sort of really terrified, childlike eyes, you could really care about what's happening for that person. But other than talking to them in a way that might help bring them back to the here and now, which is really not partner's job to be like a therapist grounding a person with BPD. But it's important to be aware of how you feel, what you're experiencing and what you're observing, but to not run too far afield with, the way that people do out there, that they say, well, this means they're being possessed, or they're evil, or look at their eyes now, or, and I'm not sure about eye color changes, but I really wonder about that perception sometimes, because if a person with BPD is having all this going on, triggered emotional dysregulation, disconnection from the here and now to one degree or other, and all that intense what's going on inside of them will affect the way they look, might affect body posture, not just eyes. So the empty eyes of BPD and the phenomenon associated with strongly dysregulated triggered emotion and how that can be translated onto one's face, and eyes can change. And it's really not more than that. And it doesn't mean anything more profoundly, or, it's not like they're psychopathic now, or they must be a narcissist, or, I saw her eyes change, or his eyes change like this, and therefore, I think people there's too much hyped up misinformation out there. So BPD, eye changes, with mood changes, with dissociation, the empty eyes, the glazed over eyes, the angry looking eyes, the aloof eyes, the cold eyes, the hard stare of just sort of like vacant, voidness behind someone's eyes and in their eyes, or that terrified young childlike looking eyes that you could suddenly be really shocked to just see that kind of change really quickly, because people with BPD have so much emotional lability and changeability and mood shifts and all of these types of things, because they don't have a stable self. They don't know the self. And the self in borderline personality disorder disappears in the emotional arrest before or by the age of 2 that these people really do go through. And then I wonder why so many people who do disseminate information about BPD, to whatever degree they do it accurately or not, just generally out there, I wonder why so many people really don't talk about the arrested emotional development. And it might be because of so much of the pseudoscience from the APA with a hegemony of Big Pharma that all to do with BPD has to be biology. I still think they're off with that. Genetics, I don't know. I don't think they know. But here's the thing that we do know. The trauma that most people with BPD go through, and at very young ages, can change the brain for sure. So the fMRIs, I think that what they're seeing in some of those studies makes sense, but I don't think that they're really interpreting them properly. Because in BPD recovery, and yes, people can recover from this. That's the other thing. You can see changes in the brain, and the neuroplasticity that really truly is a part of BPD recovery. And for a lot of people with codependency as well, there'll be neuroplasticity in the changes of reframing things and changing negative core beliefs into newly adapted, healthy beliefs. There's neuroplasticity involved in that. And so even when there is trauma that has affected a person with codependency's brain to a degree, or a person with BPD, it's not like that has to last forever. So they might be seeing some changes there in some people's brains. I don't know if they're all the same with BPD. But the thing is that the APA never really disseminates this information. First of all, it's not congruent. It's not consistent. It's all over the map because they have other agendas. But the thing is, it's not really so much the biology of BPD. Because when people go to treatment in what I think are the most efficacious, or what I know are the most efficacious treatments, DBT is good, but it's not a recovery modality. Transference-focused psychotherapy, mentalization-based treatment, combinations of that, schema therapy, and of course, if they start with DBT, great. But that's symptom management, and that can be really positive. But people with BPD need to find that self and integrate the lost self, and then they have their own inner child healing and reparenting to do in a different way, more in-depth way than people with codependency. So, the empty phenomena in BPD is important to understand, is real, but is often misinterpreted with egregious intent, I believe, intended by some people, and a lot of hyperbolic, histrionic, kind of wanting to vilify the borderline all over again.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. Our passion is to bring expert information for people that are hurt by someone with BPD. We truly hope you've gotten something from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. For more or get sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. See you next time.